Welcome to Escapists Anonymous, the fantasy fiction book club. I'm Dan.
And I'm Sam.
We hope that you've recovered from the Escapists Anonymous Awards after party, because in this episode, we're rejoining Hannah Kaner's Sunbringer as we discuss chapters 17 to 37. As King Aaron approaches Leskia on his victory march, our protagonists are still working in isolation to influence what will happen next. So strap on your Bridite armour and maybe say a prayer and brace yourself for spoilers, because the king is on his way and the stakes have never been higher. Okay, so we have completed up to the end of chapter 37.
Yeah, I like how you said the king is on his way. It feels very much like that scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail where Lancelot's running up to the castle. Because we have one chapter where Aaron's like, I'm coming, and everyone's like, the king's coming.
Yeah, that was interesting actually. I thought we would have had a lot more of Aaron, but we've had a lot of stuff going on in terms of our other kind of main protagonists. Feels like they've come together, gone back apart, all types of different things.
Well, some of them have. Kissen's still not with everybody. I'm looking forward to when she meets up with everybody. But, who knows if it's going to be in this book? Because as we've seen, as I'll cover just now, shortly in the recap, she's still not there. No. And she's not in the right city even. So, we'll see at some point, I'm sure.
Indeed. So you've got a bit of a recap for us.
A lot of one.
To catch us up to the end of chapter 37. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. So similar to how you did it in the previous Sunbringer episode, I'm going to recap by character, or at least pair of characters who go around together, Inara and Skeddy, because of how the chapters are structured. So I'll start with Elo. Elo and Naya are brought to meet Lord Yether. They are ushered into a grand room filled with mosaics and images of gods, indicating that they are likely to find Yether to be a sympathetic ear. Elo talks to the captain who brought them in. We are introduced to Farok of Yesef, a man loyal to Lord Yether. Yether is initially reluctant to close his doors to the king despite his clear distaste towards Aaron. He challenges Elo and Naya on their positions and reveals how weakened Midrin is behind all the pomp and splendour. Yether's son, Baloris, an ardent supporter of King Aaron, bursts in demanding that Elo and Naya be treated as traitors. Yether refuses and puts Baloris in his place. He says the king can only enter their lands if he halves the troops accompanying him, and Baloris is the one who has to go and deliver the message. Elo and Naya take Farok to meet with the other rebels, Canavan and Ariam. They need a plan to capture or remove all of the king's 150 knights from Leskia. Ariam questions whether Elo is the one to lead this strike, doubting that he is still able to lead men in combat. Elo challenges Ariam to spar with him and easily bests him, convincing the gathered crowd that Elo still has the chops. Elo contemplates what must be done, and that eventually he will have to kill Aaron. Suddenly, their meeting is interrupted by a messenger. Violence has broken out at the archives. They rush to Tele and Yatho's house to find it has been attacked. Yatho is inside with her assistant B. Elo orders Canavan to go and gather weapons and prepare for the strike on Cyan's Day in 6 days' time. Yatho and Elo head out to find Inara and Tele. After they have reunited with them, we jump forward to the night of the strike, Cyan's Day. Elo is gathering with the other rebels in the old theatre. Canavan is absent, supposedly praying to Lethen. Naya has brought him her great-grandfather's armour. It bears a lion symbol, similar to King Aaron's old one. When they set out into the city, Elo begins to feel like he has truly turned against the king by wearing a symbol that is no longer Aaron's. Their first target is the barracks, where they swiftly surround the off-duty king's guards and force their surrender. Racing across the city to his next target, the West Gate, Elo is reminded of his actions during the fall of Ben Raiden, when he had killed priests driven mad with bloodlust who had killed children. They arrive at the gate, but all doesn't go to plan. The Yetha guards are unwilling to fire at some of Aaron's guards, who are fighting back, and blood is shed, with some of the king's guards fleeing into the streets, forcing them to give chase. He struggles to make ground on the fleeing soldiers while on horseback through Leskia's crowded, cobbled streets, but he is guided by Lethen's power, and Elo suspects Canavan has done something to boost her presence in the city. He quickly finds out what that is. Canavan has carved his body all over with her rune and sacrificed a goat to her. He is imbued with her mad power, and it has infected the other rebels, including Ariam and Naya, who are all lost in a berserker rage, tearing the soldiers limb from limb. Elo helps them regain their senses, but Canavan is still itching for a fight and refuses to back down. One of the king's guards charges him, but Ariam gets in the way and is killed. Elo wants to show that Canavan's actions do not represent their movement, and so punishes him by publicly chopping off one of the innkeeper's fingers. The moment is interrupted by Cyan passing through the city, which causes the blood in the streets to turn to water and flow into the river. Inara and Skeddy's chapters cover this. Inara attends the Archivist Forum with Tele. The atmosphere is tense, with supporters of the king and the gods barely tolerating each other's presences. We are introduced to Solom, an archivist who was away during the God War, and Brahmin Boy, an archivist who is a member of the disgraced family who opposed the new king. There is mention of a great shrine to Yusuf being restored in the kingdom of Restish, which excites Skeddy and Inara. Tele steps forward when it's her turn to make her case that the books relating to the gods currently locked away should be moved out of Midran in case the fervour that Aaron inspires in people causes them to be damaged and lost. Tele almost convinces them, but then the archivist that Inara lied to gain access to the God Archive shouts that Tele and Inara are up to something more sinister. Chaos erupts and Tele and Inara have to flee. They retreat to Solom's house. Solom tells them a young apprentice has been killed in the fighting, but he wants to help them get the books out of Leskia. Tele doesn't care about that anymore. She's too worried about Yatho. Inara is being moody. When Skeddy suggests that Elo will come and help them, she dismisses it, believing that Elo just wants rid of them. Skeddy decides to put some space between the two of them, and he flies out above the city to see if the coast is safe, and spies a mix of both Yetha and King Aaron's soldiers around the area. He advises they should stay hidden until the evening. At that point, Elo arrives, and Inara is glad to see him, but also feels resentment at him wanting her safety. Introductions are made and plans are discussed, both Elo taking out the guards and Solomon Tele's plan to save the books. Inara wants to be included, treated like one of them, and calls on Elo to help her. He promises that he will, and so she becomes included in the plans about to unfold. On the night of Cyan's Day, Inara and Skeddy are hiding, waiting to enter the cloche with Cal and Tele. Skeddy and Inara talk to Cal. They talk about how Cal is called Brahmin Boy to diminish and shame him. He wants to save the manuscripts from his family library. Inara thinks this is a petty reason compared to Tele's more noble aims, but Cal becomes upset and says that this is all he has left of his family. When they see only one guard at the gate, they approach him and use Skeddy's powers to lie their way inside. Once in, they head to the gods section of the archive, but find the gates locked. They begin breaking into it using some of the tools borrowed from Yatho. The disruption draws Cyan's attention, who does not like people disturbing her peace, especially as, once Inara and Skeddy are inside, they open up a hatch down to the river, flowing beneath where Cyan's tomb is held. And when they start trying to take her books away, she really loses it. She calls them thieves, and her anger starts to destroy the building around them. Inara tries to use her power, but her will is shaken. Tele steps forward, and her aura of belief in what she is doing as right gives Cyan a moment of pause and a chance for Inara to gather herself and use her ability to hold Cyan in place. Cyan calms herself and is curious about Inara's power. She accepts what Tele and Inara say and hears the prayers of the people around Leskia worshipping her on her own day. She floats off into the city to walk among her people one last time, leaving the archivist to continue removing the manuscripts. Solom asks how Cyan was calmed, and Skeddy takes the credit to hide the truth about Inara's power. Solom gives Skeddy a string of beads as thanks, and it imbues him with more power. Tele, however, spotted the truth and takes Inara quietly to the side to ask her. Tele now understands why Inara wanted to sneak into the archives, and says that people like Canavan show that there is a precedent, and so an answer will be somewhere in the archives. She wants to help Inara understand her power. As for Kissen, she awakes in a hut owned by Doric, the follower of the river god Arn. The hut sits at Arn's river source, the base of her power. Doric and Kissen discuss Pato, who brought Kissen here years ago when she was training to be a Vega. Then Arn arrives and tells Kissen that a citizen has been watching over Kissen through the dagger she took from his shrine, which is how they knew where she was. Arn also says Kissen's war against Heseth will not be enough. The fire god grows stronger, being pulled back from death by her believers. Heseth seeks to conquer all nations and be the only god that humans worship. It will lead to centuries of war in Midran as other nations seek to plunder or weaken land. The only way to stop this from happening is to unite the kingdom behind Aaron. Therefore, Kissen must stop Elo from continuing with his plan to kill the king. Kissen spends more time recovering with Doric and talks to him about his own view of the gods. She is growing to respect believers a bit more, but she still has her limits. Doric gifts her a fine red cloak to protect her against the cold. Arn summons the wind god Fair to take Kissen to the talk to Aaron. They demand an offering before they will take Kissen, so she offers her Bridite cutlass to the two gods. They destroy it, and then Fair carries Kissen off into the sky. She soars through the sky for miles and miles on their back, then suddenly plummets out of the sky and lands in a pile of hay that turns out to be in a pigsty. She quickly realizes that Fair has delivered her to Seika rather than Leskia. Apparently this is where Arn wanted her to be. She makes her way out into the city to find the streets deserted. People are cowering in their houses. Soldiers have seized the city since Aaron left. Some of them arrive and confront Kissen. They are not wearing any symbols or coat of arms to identify them. Kissen says she has a message for the king and realizes that this was the wrong thing to say when they knock her to the ground and capture her. And then finally, Aaron, the one chapter we have. Aaron leaves Seika to head towards Leskia. He is wearing a helmet in the shape of Murtar's head, the dead god of war. He is intending to usurp his memory and erase Murtar from history. The people cheer him and Hestra living in his chest, and she is pleased. There we go. That's everything. All caught up. All 5 points of view covered.
Yeah. I mean, I've really enjoyed this middle part of the book, I have to say. I think I struggled a little bit with the change of pace in the first 16 chapters and adjusting to maybe my expectations, having been set in Godkiller, of this super fast-moving, action-packed thing. But now I certainly had like several scenes in this section that I really, really enjoyed and I thought were really well done. What about you?
Oh, yeah. I am. I mean, I think, I think you had a bit of a shaky start to this book, as you mentioned. I was enjoying it from page one.
Yeah.
I was really happy to be back in this world. The thing that's bothering me is how this book is structured. There are lots of short chapters jumping around, and it creates the sense of a lot of activity. And I think it's some way that Hannah Kaner is trying to manage having all of these storylines converging, but it has some good sides to it. Like, I'm feeling like I'm making a lot of progress through the book. I'm like, oh, this is only 2 pages long. This is great. Oh, another chapter done. Oh, great. But the other side of it is that I kind of feel like I'm not getting enough progress through each of the events as they happen because I'm jumping around so much. It seems a little bit disjointed.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I think one of the challenges with separating the characters up and sending them off in their different directions when you do this is that previously in Godkiller we were getting 3-4 different perspectives on kind of the same events.
Yeah.
And now it feels less connected, and it works well with Inara and Skeddy because they're largely still connected almost physically, and so you can do the whole kind of progressing what's happening with them through different perspectives.
But even then those two are being like able to travel further apart, so it almost feels like an inevitability that and that's what makes it feel almost intentional. We're having everyone become more separated. And Inara and Skeddy are one of the most literal representations of that, if you think about it, because there's that rift growing between them, and it's not openly hostile. It's this really complicated development of their relationship. Are they they're becoming very different people. Their goals are different. They're not just trying to grow up together and survive together. He's wanting to become, more of the god that he's starting to get glimpses of, who he used to be and who he could become again. And, he's receiving praise from humans, and he's like, oh, other people are giving me stuff. I'm not just being hidden up her sleeve all the time.
Yeah.
And she's going down her own path of like, well, I'm my own thing. I have my own power. Where is this from? What's going on? And now their objectives are no longer aligned. They're no longer looking to get separated like they were in the first book, which was what they wanted, or thought that they wanted. Now they're like, well, where are our lives going to go? And, when Skeddy flew up into the sky to watch out for guards, he was like, oh, I'm so free, I'm up in the air. And then when he felt the pull on Inara, there was no instant of like, oh, I'm far away from Inara, I need to be close to her. He was like, ugh, this is such a drag.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think one of my big takeaways from this is that Inara and Skeddy feel quite directionless. It's like they're passengers a little bit in terms of what's happened. They don't have their own agency in terms of just making decisions for themselves and being able to pursue them. And I think that this isn't a criticism. I think it's a sort of deliberate thing, but where Kissen and Elo are, in some ways taking charge of what's going to happen next. And there's some really great dynamics coming up, I think, between the two of them. But Inara, very much like you were saying, we had in that first episode, like them being almost the reason why all of the events happened in the first book, whereas now they're just like, Inara's desperate to be useful and maybe take some vengeance for what happened to her mother, but isn't able to do any of that. And Skeddy is, I think, sort of on this journey of self-discovery where it's like, oh, maybe I could be, an actual real god with people that actually love me and worship me.
He's Inara's sidekick, and it sounds like even if he gets restored, he'll still be Yusuf's sidekick. He'll be like, oh boy, now I'm a sidekick to a god. But I think what's interesting is, like you say, they were the inspiration, they were the kind of the catalyst for the events of book one.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with other characters taking the foreground in other books within the series. I kind of accept that, if there were like individual segmented stories, then, like here's adventure of these people and we're following more this person's backstory now, but we're having to learn about them all at once. And that's why I think you're right in that they feel quite directionless, because their revelation isn't happening yet. We've just had, she wanted to find out, they tried to separate her. There were the motivation. This book, she wants to find out what's going on with Skeddy, who he used to be, and what she could be. And all they've done so far is they've visited an archive. Yeah, and that's it. The core element of it. Yes, they've been caught up with the archivists having their Barney about who's in control of what, and she's present for these other things, and she is still in. If it hadn't have been her going to the archives, the archivist, whatever his name was, Bertram or whatever, wouldn't have been like, you lying girl, and then triggered all of that. So she's still playing an active role, but she does feel a little bit powerless. And we see that reflected in her personality, because Elo is like, it's too dangerous for you. You're too important. You have to stay locked away. And she's kind of butting up against what was a necessity of transporting her in the first book. She had to be in danger, but now because they got the option to put her in a more safe position, they're like, well, of course we'll do that. And she doesn't understand why.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a great quote from Skeddy, or in one of Skeddy's chapters, where it's like, he's really frustrated that Inara can sort of desire to be treated by like an adult, but be such a
petulant child or whatever it was.
Petulant brat or something. I think he uses the phrase or something. And it made me laugh.
But that's just it, isn't it? Like he's getting annoyed at her. They're having such conflict, and also he, in a way, he feels like a young god, but he's also clearly much, much older than her. But they both seem like immature beings.
Yeah,
like he's like, I'm a god. It's like, yeah, but you're not much of one, are you? And you have no memory of anything before a few years ago. So don't act like you're so much better than her.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm still enjoying that journey, and I think it works quite well as almost a deliberate frustration builder, because we want Inara to figure out what her powers are. But if you give that away too early in a trilogy, you're just you're going to kind of probably kill the climax.
It's all those calculations I'm sure Hannah Kane has had to make about when this stuff gets revealed. Because if she has the ability to control gods, it needs to be revealed at a certain point. If she gets too powerful too quick, then she's just like, stop that god.
Yeah.
I'll stop her, Seth. Oh, Aaron's about to ascend to godhood. No, stop that.
Yeah.
So, and also thinking about it, like, it would be kind of good if she's like, the biggest demonstration of her power is against Seth or Aaron.
Yeah.
Or as our theory goes, the god being that comes out of the belief being directed towards Aaron.
Yeah.
When that guy's like, I have ascended beyond mortals.
Yeah. And as we talked about in the last episode, that middle book of a trilogy thing and or middle film in a trilogy, if you want, that Star Wars analogy feels quite kind of appropriate of Luke figuring it. Although that's kind of split between him and Kissen, I think. Kissen being off with Arn felt like a bit of a Dagobah sort of moment. But also I think Inara's in that phase of trying to figure out her power and how she can influence the story.
Yeah. I thought there would be a bit more, like, when we talked about it in the previous episode, we had kind of hoped that she would be sitting down with who turned out to be this guy Doric and learning more. But she had some really good chats about it like that. And, this continuing development of the good that gods can do. And that's really what this book is about, because even, ones that you're supposed to be opposed to, we're now learning, well, Aaron, even though we think he's a bit of a skeezy, asshole for what he's done, turns out his presence can also serve some good.
Yeah. I love the way that, and that kind of took me by surprise as well, which I always like that in any book, but where it's like, oh, Elo wants to kill Aaron, and now Kissen's mission is to make Aaron the thing that is basically the only chance of defeating Seth.
And I think it's done really well because it doesn't feel like an arbitrary point to make the two heroes be against each other. Like, when Arn said it, I was like, that makes a lot of sense. Like, we have heard about, the other ships from the other nations coming in, wanting to, they're going to cause more stuff. You had Lord Yetha saying, like, we're going to be picked apart, we're weakened. It's all believable. Like, she's threaded the little bits in and out of all the rest of the narrative. So when Arn says it, couldn't help but agree with her, and reluctantly so.
Yeah.
Because, I don't want Aaron to be on the side of these guys.
But it's just, the great thing about it is almost the insinuation that from Arn, and I got this, I don't know whether you did, it'll be interesting to hear, but that you almost have to encourage that idea of Aaron being this god type of king. It's not just you're siding with the king. It's like he has to have everybody's faith in order to be able to compete with Seth.
Yeah.
Was that how you understood that?
Yeah,
or maybe the interpretation or insinuation, maybe.
I agree with you. No, I hadn't entirely. For me, it was just, we can't, like, as a political level, knows that it has to be one side against Seth. You can't be split in civil war.
Right.
But you're right. The belief would be the other important thing, but it has to come with the plurality of gods being allowed to continue, right? Because otherwise Arn would be like, well, they're both equally bad,
Yeah, love that dynamic and where that's heading, and the fact that it's taken Kissen to Sakra. I think we talked when we were talking about Godkiller about being interested in what Sakra is like as a city, so hopefully we'll get to see a little bit of that now as well. And the way that, I mean, again, just picking a random chapter to end on that's 2/3 of the way through, I feel like we ended at a really brilliant point where the king has no power here, or whatever it was that guy said to her. It's like, whoa, so what's happened in Sakra since the king's like marched out of the city?
But we've also had potentially like a end of Helm's Deep moment where, like, they've secured the city, like Cyan's walk through, washing away all the bloodshed, and the sun is rising. We're like, okay, that tense scene is over, but here's the next thing. So yeah, I think, and again, we don't plan that, but it has worked out really well.
Yeah.
But at the moment, I think because things are moving at such a pace between the chapters, that there was a higher chance of it happening.
Yeah.
Because of the jump around in chapters, did you realize that 6 days had passed at one point?
No, not. I can't.
Yeah.
I kind of got the sense that maybe a couple of days had passed. It all felt like it was moving very quickly. And I guess that's the thing, is like, if you're trying to move quickly, but then you're also trying to show that a longer period of time has passed, sometimes those two things can sort of fail to complement each other.
Yeah. And it is because, this is what effectively marked the break in the book, was this poster.
Oh.
Yeah, look at that.
Blimey. Is there any other stuff like that in the book?
No, just that one.
Huh.
And so it's about Cyan's Day, and then it opens with the little note in bold type that says Cyan's Day, like it's an entry in a journal. And I was like, oh, okay, they felt like they've had to actually put something in to make you visually see a break in the story. And it made me go, oh, that's interesting. Oh, it's because we've jumped forward in time. And so that means also that Kissen was staying with Doric for 6 days healing.
To be fair, I think in Kissen's part of it, that felt like a bit more time had passed with her recovering. But I thought with the stuff with Elo, it felt very much like from the moment where Elo arrived, where Inara and Skeddy and Solomon and that, they're sort of hiding out, and then Elo comes to find them. It felt like from when all the stuff happened in the city was about 12 hours.
Yeah, it felt like the next day, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, again, just the conveying of that passage of time, I felt could have been better. And there's clear acknowledgement in it because they felt they had to put this thing in to be like, there's a break here. But for me, I felt the Kissen one. I was thinking through the timeline going, okay, so Kissen was already further ahead in the timeline, I guess. And then I went back and it was like, oh no, they're like, you should rest more. Because there was no kind of discussion of like, you felt that she'd been talking and having kind of ongoing chats with Doric. She's like, I've come to grow and like his conversation. But there was no mention of, I've also seen Anna a bunch of times, or she never visited over the course of these 6 days. This is the only time she's come back, or has she just been sitting patiently on the edge of her little pool for several days?
I think this is one of the things, though, in sort of probably all literature. How do you make dialogue feel convincing but not get too boring? And it's like, ultimately, every conversation that you put in your book should be a meaningful conversation, and that means that you have to figure out a way of kind of showing that time has passed, but also kind of accepting that people are going to have to get on board with the idea that every conversation they read has some kind of meaningful implication on the storyline. And it's like a real challenge for authors to do exactly what you're saying, in terms of like, oh man, we'd like 6 days, she's just been hanging out, and have they not spoken? It's like the whole of Downton Abbey. It's like they don't talk for like 3 years at a time, and then when they have a conversation, like everyone's super surprised by everything that's happened. You're like, don't you live in the same house? Like,
it's a big house. It's a big house. It's like, oh, I haven't seen you in months. You've been in the West Wing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I guess you're absolutely right. In the same way that, some dialogue, because it has to have a purpose or not be, to fit with the theme of it, it can't be awkward. Like, I've never seen anyone finish a phone conversation in a TV or film thing in like a more in a natural way, being like, bye, see ya, bye, yeah, bye.
Oh,
see ya, bye.
And another thing.
Bye. Like, I was watching something yesterday, and the way the end of the conversation was like, anyway, we'll have to see what we find out.
But you know what? On this topic, it occurred to me while I was reading this that in a book, you very rarely read about someone just stopping and like going to the toilet or like having a shower, like cleaning themselves. And there was an opportunity for Kissen where she's like, do you not want to clean, like clean yourself? Like, oh, we could have some actual realistic kind of thing. Yeah, like, yes, I'd like to not smell like absolute, like
I'm covered in, yeah.
But she turns it down. So through solidarity with the fantasy genre, like no one ever showers, no one ever goes to the toilet, no one ever, there's no boring sort of day-to-day activities going on in this genre.
Oh, I feel like Joe Abercrombie was probably has someone going for a poo at some point.
No, they'll shit themselves, but it's never a choice.
It's because they've just been stabbed and they're dying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think with that dialogue, yeah, like I get the yeah, I feel like she could have done a little bit better with that time transition. And again, like, out with my notes for the recap, Kissen's was far and away the shortest because it was she's with Doric, she talks to Arn, she then talks to Arn again after about, and then Fair arrives, gives her sword, she's off.
Yeah.
It felt like I was craving more Kissen.
I was craving more Arn, I think. I think there was.
Yeah. I
thought,
think Kissen was craving more Arn.
Oh yeah. There was some sexy stuff there, wasn't there? And actually, that whole process of Arn sort of talking through how she's thinking and feeling about Heseth was really almost the crux of what's happening in this book.
Yeah.
And it did a perfectly good job of setting the scene about how worried they are. But yeah, I think we're all interested in the gods and how they think and feel about things. And
yeah, I agree. Like Kissen's expectations of what Arn would want to do were kind of altered because she was like, well, why would you care? You're just a river. Like the river will still be there. Things will still use the river. And Arn clearly has more of an involvement with humans than she likes to admit.
Yeah. So another thing that I absolutely loved, a particular chapter, was that gathering of the archivists, which just became increasingly like tense and then chaotic. And I just thought it was done so well. I just thought it just grew, and it really depicted like the anger and the division and then the chaos and all of that.
And the loss of what they used to be. They're talking about like people would bring forward information from every single different area, and we discuss it and be like, "Wow, that was great! Oh, I'm so glad we were talking about this.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you found that." But now Solom's like, "I've brought some information and knowledge about the gods," and some people are like, "Oh." I think one of the other really cool bits of it was Inara viewing the auras and what effect Aaron has had. Everyone used to have their own auras, their own colors. The people who believe in Aaron, they're his colors. They're the blue, and there's the yellow edging, and like they're losing their individuality. And I think that's a really good way for Hanakena to have portrayed how they're giving themselves over. We haven't had Inara looking at Heseth followers, but I reckon you would probably see a similar thing in their auras, just uniform, like fire, crackly red and black.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of devotion that Aaron and Heseth are both inspiring. That's so different from the other gods, because they're saying subsume your identity into what I want you to be, and it's quite a statement on this notion of when someone joins an organization. Because I'm constantly asking myself when I'm reading this book, what is Hanakena's stance on religion, or even monotheistic religion? Because that seems to be the antagonistic force within these books. What do you think?
I agree. Yeah, totally agree. I think it's that, and I think what you just said, like that removal of like individual beliefs, homogenization of general approaches to faith, worship, and like inflexibility around what's allowed to be right or wrong.
And another really good thing about this scene, I agree, this is one of my favorite scenes as well, is how it relates to so many aspects of our current discourse. It's so reflective of modern situations, just general discussions within families and organizations. We're like, oh, we're open and chatting, but really they're not. There's stuff you can't talk about anymore. There's stuff that, it's just they're touchy subjects because there's such division, no middle ground can be reached.
What I also really loved about that scene was that it would have been really easy to have like the King's Guard just like marching in, not even paying any attention to who they might hurt or not hurt and what the rules are, and just kind of say, oh, we're the authority. But actually there was like a sort of back and forth, like, you're not allowed to be in here, Kingsguard don't have any place in here. And they didn't just kind of march and trample over everybody. They were like, there was sort of a hesitation of, what do we do? And I think that really depicted what's happening in the world, where there's this massive shift in, not being allowed to worship gods, Aaron becoming this kind of god type figure, and taking a much more authoritarian position, but potentially the rest of the world not having caught up with that, but feeling like there's a direction of travel.
They were aware of what they were doing, but the line has now been crossed. And I think that's what I kind of got the immensity from. That's why blood being drawn, that, even though how small it was, just that little apprentice, Gia, however it was said on the audiobook, someone's dead. Guards have entered the archive, blood was drawn. This will happen again more readily. And that's such an important thing in any kind of political discourse, or the collapse of a system, or, just massive societal change. Once something's happened once, it will happen again more easily. And I feel kind of we did get the enormity of that.
I do think that that's kind of been my high point really so far. We had sort of quite a bit of action just as we were sort of getting to the end of this section that we read, with Elo's plans and Canavan's side quest that he decided to take himself on, and a bunch of other people with him. What did you make of all of that?
I was just starting to try and like Canavan. I was like, oh, okay, he's a rough and ready guy. He's got his own god who he's really committed to. They're part of him. And I really like Lethen as a god of the ways of guiding, travelers. Like, really cool. There's a really cool god. And when, the moss and the darkness crept into the city, that's so cool. I just wish that it wasn't such a jerk. Like, he's so selfish. For someone who's all about, I protect travelers, like, her representative as Canavan is just like, yeah, he's so arrogant and just all about himself. It's like, as long as I get what I want, then I don't care. It's like, well, what do you want? Because you seem to just want this fight and nothing else. And he serves as the representative of, when you have a revolutionary movement, those people who take it too far. They want change. They don't know what they want to change it to. All they know is they don't like what they got right now, and they're willing to do anything to get away from it.
But it's interesting, the parallels between, what you were saying about Arn understanding that if you're going to fight back against the Seth, you can't be divided. Elo's kind of got that same thing, like, if we're going to have this rebellion against the king, if it's going to go to plan, we can't have divergence in strategy, tactics, whatever, or just like rogue people like Canavan going off and declaring his own sort of mini battles in the streets of the city. And are you getting a little bit of chemistry between Elo and Naya?
Potentially, yeah. It might be partly a shared background, and they're kind of like, there's kind of they have aligned interests. I don't know necessarily. Do I think that's chemistry?
I thought that
because I feel like maybe because in my mind it's like, oh, because Elo and Kissen are going to happen. I don't see there's room here for a love triangle.
There was a few moments around where she was giving him the armor to wear and stuff like that, where I was like, this feels quite tender and sort of caring in a way that isn't necessarily just we're on the same side in the rebellion.
Maybe it's because in my mind, Naya is older, like more of a maternal figure. In my mind, like, Elo's like 30s, early 30s, and Naya's like 50 something.
I haven't necessarily ever had a picture of Naya's age, so I've just put her, I guess maybe I'm envisaging something around the two of them being a similar age. But even then, I think even if they were having a slight age gap, I don't think that's necessarily a barrier.
Yeah.
Just, I guess actually you could misinterpret a tender moment of romance for a tender maternal moment, maybe because they're from the same place. There is a good chance that she could remind him of his mother's, and that could be a dynamic that's being created there. But yeah, I guess maybe I've just started feeling this like, ooh, is there a little bit of a connection there?
Yeah,
Because he still thinks that Kissen's dead.
it's true.
And actually what's happened with Kissen has sort of opened him up to human connections with people post being super traumatized by his past. And then Kissen's going to come back in and complicate the whole thing. But I'm really intrigued by what's happened in Sakura. I'm wondering whether it's something to do with the rebellion that's sort of moved in after him, or could it be something to do with Heseth?
The rebellion that we're seeing taking place in Leskia, it feels too disjointed. I think it's another kind of like cell of that same sentiment erupting, but it doesn't seem like it's representing any particular lord or faction. Otherwise, they'd be wearing, unless Hanakena specifically had them not wearing uniform to create that sense of mystery, and we find out there is actually some other lord in a second, or whether it is like a more populist movement that isn't tied down to a particular lord or rebel faction of
like so just some kind of power vacuum has emerged. I mean, a bit bizarre for the king to just leave the city and allow that to happen.
Yeah, especially because in one of the one chapter we did have, as he's leaving the city in his armor, he's like, oh, this is the biggest city. I was expecting a tomato or something to be thrown. But no, there's nothing. Everyone here loves me. It's like, okay, well, they don't, clearly.
But in Godkiller, they did make a very deliberate point of talking about all of the conflicts in Sakura and how there are lots of the houses of nobility that are sort of conspiring against Aaron within the city, and that was why he had to go back to the city supposedly anyway, and Elo had to go off to Blenraiden. Whether there was an element of truth,
whether he was just saying that as a reason why he didn't want to go, and also because he was like weak. He's like, I'm dying.
But whether some of that was based in truth, that actually he did need to go back to hold on to power in the meantime. I think the outside possibility, probably unlikely, is that Heseth's influence has reached Sakura and is kind of...
Maybe a little bit, but I mean, I just don't... I feel like having Heseth kind of building her base in Telesia and then kind of flooding down seems like... Yeah, because we should have had more characters established within the city by now. I guess although because Aaron was Heseth's presence within the city. Maybe. I just hadn't thought about that being a possibility. I just immediately assumed these guards don't seem to be associated with Heseth because they're not wearing anything associated with her.
But I think what we've learned through Kissen's story, and obviously it's all been in Telesia, is that Heseth's power base is much, much more widely spread than she could have possibly imagined. So that's why I'm just kind of clinging on to that a little bit, that perhaps there's been more going on even across Midrun than anybody realizes, and it's all going to come to a head at the right moment.
I think I would still be surprised if it happened, but
me too.
You're right. It could be that she's got agents within the city, but I feel like because we've got this talk about like Midrun's too just disunited, that it wouldn't be her. It would be someone else. Yet another faction causing more disruption.
Yeah.
Final thing is great to see another mention of Celt.
Yeah.
Celt.
I feel like we're building towards a climax involving Celt in some way, shape, or form.
What's that blotting out the sun? Oh, it's a giant fixed sandal.
Or like the Neville Longbottom moment in the Deathly Hallows.
The sword,
Except it'll be a broken
sandal. Because it's the thing is he's the god of broken sandals, but surely he's fixing them. Yeah. So it would be just just this massive pristine sandal.
Yeah. that had been previously broken.
Previously broken, of course. So
a massive
character,
refurbished sandal.
yeah, a character would make it known to us, like, that looks like it's been recently fixed to almost mint condition. It
Yeah.
can only be cold. Cold.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great.
Actually, there's been a story about that.
Yeah. So to conclude, and as we always do predictions, we've talked about a lot. I feel like Tele sort of talking to Inara about the fact that Canavan sort of provides a precedent for this type of connection between a god and a human, perhaps plays into our prediction from last week around, where Cyan had said, I haven't heard about anything like this for centuries, and Tele's kind of guiding Inara to not look for herself in the archives, but to look for some kind of historic event that was similar.
And they're about to leave with loads of books that relate to the gods. It's going to be in one of those books that they take. We've even had Cal being like, some of these books belong to my family. I wouldn't be surprised if one of the purpose he serves is like, well, look at my books. There's, they find it in one of his family's books.
Yeah.
Just to tie it in together quite neatly.
We're getting a bit of a network of archivists now, aren't we, with Solomon and Cal and Tele and stuff, and that provides all of these sources of information for Inara. And then obviously Solomon's come and talked about this new shrine to Yusuf.
Yeah, I think he will be the catalyst for this because he'll have greater knowledge of this. He's clearly interested in the gods, whereas Tele might not have had as much knowledge. So, I agree with that prediction that we'll find more in potentially in these books, and then Tele and Solomon will be the driving forces behind that. Like I say, I think Kissen won't get there until the end of this book, but God help Hannah Kaner if she's not there by the end of this book. Because it just makes sense. It just makes sense for her to be there. I don't want her going off somewhere else, being caught up in Seika when she needs to be with the rest of the group, ready for the third book where they're all together again.
Well, she's got to get out of a cage first.
Yeah, exactly. So I want more Kissen chapters. I want, Elo to have it out with Aaron. Just, you've got this, the one thing he wants to do is have a conversation with Aaron. Like, he just needs to be like, I loved you and you were there for me. You know, real kind of like heart-rending catharsis kind of chat that probably ends in a fight. That's really representative of how their relationship worked and the things they never talked about,
Yeah. Do you think that relationship is recoverable? I mean, he's literally tried to sacrifice him.
We've all been there in those kind of relationships, Dan.
We've all tried to sacrifice our friends to a fire god in order to attain godhood.
Yeah,
I think the only way that happens is if Kissen convinces Elo that we'll kill him afterwards.
And her arrival will be that kind of catalyst into the scene, being like, look, I'm not dead. Also, here's an opinion you won't like.
Yeah.
So that's where I think it's going to go. But I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to reading this last third of this book. I've had more of a mixed opinion on this book, I think, than I did with the first one. But still, loving the world, loving the story. I want to get to the end.
Yeah, same. And I'd be really interested to hear from anybody out there who's reading along, or maybe you've already read all of it, so don't give us any spoilers before we finish it, but let us know what you think of our opinions and any predictions you've got if you haven't finished the book. Leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. Like and subscribe, that helps us out. If you are on Instagram, TikTok or Facebook at Escapist Anonymous Pod, you can find us. Again, leave a comment or send us a message and we'll happily read out some of your thoughts or discuss them even in detail. If you are listening on a platform that allows you to leave reviews or ratings, please do so. That helps us to reach more people. And other than that, all that's left for you to do is finish Sunbringer by the time we drop our next episode, and we will be giving our final conclusions about where this middle book of the trilogy has left us heading into book 3, which I believe is maybe out or coming out very soon. So yeah, all that's left is to say we'll see you in the next episode of Escapists Anonymous, and it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.